Hello, my name is Matilde and welcome to Acres of Creation, a paleophenomenological approach. So thank you for having me today at Creswell Crags. I am an eclectic existential psychotherapist. I'm an artist, a writer. I do have a BA and a practice-led master by research in fine art from York St. John, and I am now a PhD candidate at Bangor University. So during this session today, I will be taking you on a journey through time and space to the origin of paleophenomenology. So I define paleophenomenology as an interdisciplinary framework that is used to explore the emergence of consciousness in early human beings and their ancient human impulse to create by tapping into their lived experiences. And these are loads of words. So as I said in the description, this journey was part vision, part discovery, part adventure, but actually it starts with a disaster. So in August 1988, I suffer from what I can only describe as black brain. I don't feel anything. I don't sense. I don't perceive. I'm just like basically nothing. I go from being a young, bright, and courageous woman to be zeroed. And that really happens in a fraction of a second. I'm just sitting there and I'm left there to sit. I mean, I'm heavily medicated, of course. But I don't recognize even the basic stimuli of hunger or thirst, being tired or being sleepy. I'm left alone most of the time, also because I don't think that people knew how to handle me at the time. And inside my head, there is absolutely nothing. The only thing that I can think and see and perceive is just blackness. After about 6 months, somehow the gates open again and I can feel and sense everything. And when I'm saying everything, I mean everything. All the colors are bright, all the images are sort of like macro. I can hear everything, I can sense everything. And somehow, like St. Paul on the way to Damascus, I see the light. Everything is bright, is loud, is intense, is shiny, it's scary. I never had an LSD trip or tried ayahuasca, but I think that by the description, what I've experienced was something very similar. And it will take me some 15 years to fine-tune every experience. Now I can play with it when I want to. But the things that I remember now feeling sort of the most of what I was losing was actually the possibility of moving. I've been traveling from a very young age with my granddad. I started when I was about 8, just me and him. We traveled around the world. They took me everywhere. And finding myself from being a very free, expansive and traveling and adventurous woman to actually being sitting there in a dark room basically the whole day was very heavy. 1989, I crossed the streets in Udine, which is the city in the northeast of Italy where I was living, and I see my face in the window of that shop that you can see there. I see my body, I see my face, I see my head, I see my face, I see my eyes, and I seem to look through my eyes. Somehow I really see myself. And at that moment, I ask myself the question, why are we here? And straight in that moment, I decide that what I want to create is a kind of a think tank around a white table where I can actually bring together people from different disciplines and we can all try to answer that same question, why are we here? Of course, I'm not believed. People don't seem to be interested. Still the north of Italy in the end of the 80s. But instead, I at the time, I just decided to go and study foreign languages at university, and I studied German philology and linguistics. So I'm interested in the differences between language and meaning and significance. I fall in love with James Joyce and Ezra Pound because stream of consciousness somehow gives me the possibility of making connection and making up also new words if I wanted to. And then in November 1995, my father passes away, and in that moment, I ask myself, why are we here, and where do we go from here? So I go on a kind of like a theological and spiritual detour, and I try everything. I try Zen, Tao. I've been with the Jehovah's Witnesses for about 3 years. New Age. Loads of New Age. Those were the years of the Celestine prophecy. Wicca, magic, tarot, horoscope, you name it. I'm like a kid in a spiritual sweet shop. I buy Bibles in Greek and Latin, dictionaries. I read everything, try everything. And I teach myself Akkadian over a summer just because I love the marks left on a stone. I decided to go to the OU as a distant student, and I study geophysiology because spirituality doesn't answer my questions. So I decided to go to science. And basically, on the structure of James Lovelock's Gaia theory, I study biology, ecology, oceanography, marine biology, environmental systems. And basically, I'm looking for God's algorithm, even though my Jungian clinical supervisor for my work says that I was looking for Matilde's algorithm instead. You probably have noticed a little logo at the beginning. This is an early sketch of what I call Les Archéologues. In 1991, my husband, well, ex-husband now, takes me to the south of France to a conference on early marks on les gravures left the Val de Merveille. And of course, I am really inspired by the sorcerer, or the tribal chief, as is called, one of the drawings left on the rock. And of course, by Jean-Michel Basquiat's portrait in 1986. And I'm very fond of it also because his mother's name was Matilde. And by, any drawing that a kid would do, this is taken from a book titled The Child as a Visual Artist. So I think that I'm really good company in a way. Fast forward to August 2008. I leave everything behind. The situation at home is not good. I decided to come back to the UK because I studied before as an IB student at the Atlantic College in South Wales back in 85, 87. And so I decided to come back to the UK. I trying to answer again my questions about what happened to me, about my black brain and spirits, etc. I decided to become a psychotherapist. So I get my diploma in 2016. And I will always remember this day, Friday, the 24th of March, 2017, finds me at St. Cecilia's Church, North Wales, near Bangor. And I'm reading this book by Sharon Blackheath, Women Rose Rooted, and I'm in floods of tears by myself by the sea, and really wanting to come back to move to Bangor. I want to live by the sea. I want to do something different with my life, but I don't know where to start. So in September 2018, I enroll in a foundation in art and design course at Blackburn College, was a UAL University Arts of London course, and I do it part-time, which then leads me to go to 2022 to York St. John and do my BA in fine art. Of course, I wanted to go near the sea towards Bangor, and I found myself completely in the opposite direction. I'm actually going to York to do fine art. One of the most important thing is that I, in all of these years from 2008 till 2020, I start moving again, and I enjoy the traveling. I enjoy the experience. I enjoy the adventure, and of course, being a foreigner in this country, every time I go out, for me, is just like a mini holiday. So that makes me really very, very happy. So I go to university in York, and I discover what I call my three father figures. And these are Martin Heidegger, Tim Ingold, and of course Gilles Deleuze. So Martin Heidegger, because of course he writes in 1950s this beautiful essay, The Origin of the Work of Art, which to me makes a lot of sense. Tim Ingold, because he's a British paleoanthropologist, and I never met him, but I wrote him numerous emails, and he's always so kind and blessing me, answers and replies straight away with a lot of suggestions. And Gilles Deleuze, because Gilles Deleuze gives me a rhizomatic approach. And the moment that I discover rhizomes and a rhizomatic approach, my whole world and my whole thinking processes change. So during this final year of the BA, I write my dissertation, and I decide to write it on Hilma af Klint, titled Routing for Hilma. And of course, I use a rhizomatic approach. I am, of course, informed and inspired by James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, Zabard, Olivia Ling, and Rebecca Solnit. And my critical approach stems from the realization that when I am standing in front of an artwork, I don't question what we would call the linearity of T.J. Clark. So T.J. Clark said, there is this tree-like conception of knowledge that comes from above. For example, there is a historical event which influences a country, the country influences a group of people, or like an intelligentsia, or sort of like cultural milieu, and out of this group of people, one person stands out, and this person creates a piece of work. And this is normally how we would read the blurb next to any piece of art in any museum, for example. So this has happened, that has led this piece of art, this work of art to be created. But the moment that I stand in front of an artwork, I tend to experience the work. Maybe I'm taken to memories I might have forgotten. I do connections. I sort of like embody and I experience a lived experience. And so in this sense, I was very critical in my dissertation about this kind of a linearity of art history. Also, I was very much against historians and writers such as James Elkins, for example, who define spiritual art just as bad art, and I was very much against it. Somehow my dissertation was a very angry take against sort of like intelligentsia in a very rebellious and anarchical way. Fortunately, I win an award with my dissertation because I decided to take this kind of like rhizomatic approach. So in this also way, philosophy and rhizomatic approach and Gilles Deleuze somehow validate my way of thinking. And this, of course, makes me extremely happy. So this is something that I wrote in my dissertation. And this is the same hope that I have for tonight, for this evening. I still hope that I can convince you that a personal, subjective reading of an artwork or an event or something that we are studying is as authoritative as any academically informed one. I think that this practice that I call of deep stylistic freedom and openness to inquiry allows for a continuous connection making that is not hierarchical, but that fortunately consent for a fictional, historical, literal, critical, soteriological, and especially tautological branch in art, because I'm very comfortable with tautology. So what happens? I finished my BA and I decided to stay at York St. John because I would be working with the same supervisors for my practice-led master by research. Of course, at that point, there is a lot of Deleuze rhizomes. There is Ingold's 4A, which are the anthropology that gives us people, archaeology that gives us time, art for creativity and imagination, and architecture for space. So I'm learning a lot from Ingold. Of course, Heidegger's phenomenology, Christian mysticism, Vedanta, you name it, I throw it in there. And of course, I discover alchemy. And alchemy gives me blue, gives me materiality, gives me spirituality, making, being, metaphor, symbolism, physics. It gives me basically everything. It's a language that helps me translate a lot of what goes on within me. Another important thing is that I draw a lot. This is a piece titled Caught in the Act of Drawing, which was part of the York Open Studios in 2022. This piece is is about 7 meters long and 1.5 meters high. And I do performance drawing, which means that I draw for about 8 hours solid per day, normally with music, barefoot, and people just watch me draw, and I just sort of like follow the inspiration that comes in the moment. Even Happier Woman, as I said, because by doing a master's by research, which is somehow like a mini PhD in a way, like a very contained, I am allowed finally to really give my sort of like push the envelopes and push the boundaries, and I really put together everything. I use a lot of journaling, self-reflection. I use tarot cards. I use sketches. I use Greek mythology, and finally at the end in September 2023. I submit my exegesis and the supporting documents. So for anyone interested, my thesis on encountering the divine in the act of drawing and the supporting documents, which are the Polyhymniades, which are extract of my journaling, reflections, the photographs, and then there is a link for a YouTube video, can be found on my website. In my thesis, I made two very clear points. That I'm not interested in the representation and in the final art piece, but only in the act of making, in the act of the doing. And then some artists describe the art of being in the zone or being in the momentness of drawing. But to me, it's always been different. It was, and it is, a meeting between the horizontality of the immanence with the verticality of transcendence, where there is a specific meeting with something that is greater, larger, more significant somehow than ourselves. It's a relationship, it's including a relationship. And I'm stealing happily from an Italian comedian, Paolo Rossi, when he was describing this sort of like trying to meet, trying to meet up between a seagull and a dolphin, where there is a constant, I'm coming up to see you, no, I'm coming down to meet you up, no, I'm coming up, and no, I'm coming down. But there is always this sort of like a desire to constantly meet up between the transcendence and the soul, kind of our own personal soul is calling out for something that is greater, let's call it divine, in quote unquote, and the divine trying to actually call for us. And as I said, everything is available on my website if you were so interested. Anyway, finally, January 2024, I finally get to Bangor because I started my PhD there. The first thing that I do, of course, I go back to Sant'Isilio and I lit a candle, and then I hide in the library so many books. I'm just like a really kid on a sweet shop. I find everything that I'm interested in and even more. And paleophenomenology takes a definite shape now. And I feel especially that my thinking process and my way of connecting dots somehow is acknowledged and is seen and validated by an academic and philosophical approach. I know that I had to wait all these years, but they're worth it because I think that now I've got something to say and I feel that I belong somewhere. So, paleophenomenology. This framework, again, it's an interdisciplinary and rhizomatic approach. And that means that from archaeology, I get the physical traces left by ancient humans. I get the data, I get the locations. Then anthropology places the humans in the space. Phenomenology places me in that same space. Art history gives me as an artist meeting fellow artists, albeit 75,000 years apart. Phenomenology of the landscape gives me space and time. And alchemy, of course, manipulation of materials. And the question of the unknown. Shamanism is the hands-on spirituality, which is the sort of like relationship with the unknown. And Jungian analysis gives us the symbols, the unconscious mind, this collective process and symbolic languages, visions, dreams, hypotheses, and to explore, but also to trust. And all of this to answer the same questions. Why are we here? Paleophenomenology focuses on understanding the emergence of consciousness in early humans. This is the framework that I'm using. My archaeologist supervisor decides and tells me that he believes that I need specifically a place and a cave so that I can focus my research. It tells me to look for a cave and then set all my studies on that. But I actually then do the other way around because I am me. So what I do is that I find, first of all, I find a drawing that I like. So I just go online and I say, I'm going to go for the drawing. The drawing would give me a cave and the cave would give me a date. And the date, I will focus actually my research then. So I find this drawing and I'm fascinated by this drawing. There is something about this drawing that I find very beautiful and very appealing. And this drawing gives me this place, which is La Pasiega in Spain. It's a cave. And the dating, it gives me Neanderthals. So after a year and a half, basically reading about Homo sapiens, I have to go back and start reading everything again, but from a Neanderthal perception. So all the differences between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. And I find and discover this amazing book by Gliubich titled The Naked Neanderthal. And it explains so beautifully about the somehow Neanderthals to me are like embryonic in because then they disappeared, so they didn't have the time to evolve if ever they would have done. Evolve it to a different level, and they are sort of like contained. They're really individuals and they're very unique. And I decided that I was actually very happy that coincidentally and synchronistically, talking in a Jungian terms, I actually got to work somehow with them. I also have to say that, of course, I'm reading everything that is available. I, of course, working from a Jungian perspective, I'm fascinated of all the synchronicities in my life, from the trip to, of course, Val de Merveille with the magus or the sorcerers, but also the hands of La Cueva de las Manos in Argentina, which is the artist and lecturer Jamie Holman from Blackburn College showed me on my very first day of my foundation course. Or, for example, this book by Ian Tattersall, The Last Neanderthal, which I bought in 1996 for no reasons whatsoever. But I seem now to be collecting all these sort of like seeds I've planted along the way. So my black brain makes sense to me with this expansion afterwards, after 1 year. The idea of a think tank of different people from different disciplines. The spiritual buffet that I went on. And then this sciences at Open University. This book on Neanderthals. Of course, Deleuze and Heidegger, my rhizomatic thinking, and now, of course, Carl Jung. I find fascinating when I'm reading the overlapping, sort of like kind of parallel thinking processes, somehow similar when we're talking about therapy and parallel processes, but this is actually what happens even in paleophenomenology, because, for example, in art history, teaches us that art comes from the perspective of the definition dictated by normally someone who was, and unfortunately still is, mainly a male, white, middle class, educated, and who prescribes the canons of beauty with a capital B, and what an art gallery should be, which is normally a white cube with a very sleek and modern grey floor and glasses of white wine. And this is contrary to artifacts, which are normally found in museums and which belong to the category of artisanal pieces, and where the maker is not an artist and is never an artist, but is a craft maker. So it's kind of different perceptions. And in the same way, Jung asks us to look at God not from the point of view of us, but from the point of view of God himself. So we normally look at God, for us believers, from the perspective of human beings expecting God to be all-powerful and not morally flawed. While, for example, if you ever read Jung's answer to Job, he explains how Job actually realizes how God somehow is potentially flawed. And so if we look at God from God perspective, we would look at God in a different way. And in the same way, Gliubich in his Naked Neanderthal tells us to look at Neanderthals not from a Homo sapiens perspective. So normally we would look at them and expect them to draw, make, and create and think and behave as us. And if we don't see that, we potentially would not define them even as humans. And of course, I'm coming from a very subjective experience in paleophenomenology, but always trying then to take a step back and being objective somehow in a way. Finally, look at me, 2024, for my birthday, I get to Creswell Crags. For the people who are present tonight and have never been there, it's a beautiful limestone gorge with caves near Derbyshire, and one of them is Church Hall, where they discovered tools which belonged to Neanderthals. And I'm there and compared to the scared and frightened me of 1988, suffering from claustrophobia and then agoraphobia and claustrophobia again, and panic attacks, I feel very comfortable, very at peace. And I live this beautiful experience somehow again of going from the black brain to be flooded with images and of course, thoughts. And of course, look at me. I can only be me going into a cave with wearing sunglasses on. So I am asking you to imagine what it would mean to have the very first instance of awareness, because we take having thoughts for granted, as dreams and visions. But imagine people who were never aware of having thoughts. And then in a second, maybe, being aware of having these thoughts and having their mind flooded and filled with images and sensations and emotions. A whole population lived simply by being aware of their tangible world and the visible. And then they are inundated with images and sensations and thoughts, like me in 1989, and they can feel, they can perceive, and especially they are aware of feeling and perceiving. And at a meta level, they're beginning to be aware of their awareness of feeling. I'm holding a leftover of a charred piece of wood from yesterday's fire. My hand gets dirty. I rub my hand against my thigh. I leave a mark. I touch a stone. I leave a mark. And then I stop. I stop and see. At that point, I notice. And then I kneel. I might get some mud, and I do the same. But this time, I do it intentionally. So my question is, why in a cave? Because, of course, a cave is a dark, damp, wet, cold place full of echoes and animals. So why do I leave a mark there? And for whom? What do I find there? And I know that some of the caves have some drawings, of course, right to the entrances, because it was easier with the different kinds of light of seeing actually these images, but some others are really down deep in the dark. At the time, we've got to realize that the world becomes now dual. There is a visible and tangible part, and then there is an invisible and uncanny part. And this invisible seems to be everywhere because it follows me. It's omnipresent, whether I'm in the cave, outside, or sleeping. And if I have an invisible part, do you have it too? My research then started being present in a cave, and by reading what I was reading and the experiences, I started having a lot of series of questions. So one of the questions that I had is where our thoughts come from, because are we sure that these are in our head? Because if I lived in the 17th century, I would have been taught that thoughts come from the heart and not from the head. What about the voices of insight and intuition? Because those voices sound different. And are they coming from the outside or inside? Whose voice actually is that one? So the more I was reading and the more I was expanding, I realized that I had even more questions. What compelled these people to draw? And especially, who are the viewers? I mean, Heidegger talks about the preservers, or the community of people who are interpreting and preserving the truth hidden within a work of art. I'm standing in front of a work of art, or a drawing, or a painting, and I can interpret aletheia, or the truth that actually stays behind, and then I can preserve it and then pass it on. Or are caves sensory deprivations area? Because when my brain flooded with images, I can promise you, I wanted it to stop because it was so much and it was too much. So was drawing in a cave almost a meditative practice for this new activity of thinking to stop? Or was it because they wanted to focus more on the invisible by sort of like avoiding all the visible parts and sort of hiding in the dark cave? Plato's caves and Knossos, are those stories come from almost a transgenerational, loads of generation, but transgenerational memory that is being passed on. My hope is that, of course, Paleophenomenology offers a new lens for understanding consciousness and creativity of early humans. And of course, Jung's lens helps with this visionary and metaphorical language. So my research got to a point in which I had a lot of questions, but I started theoretically providing some of the answers. At the beginning, they were not aware of the concept of the split, let's call it like this, where early humans became aware of their consciousness and their unconscious rising into a conscious level. And I use here the metaphor of the Garden of Eden to explain the shift from a state of blissful ignorance to an awareness of separation. So at the beginning, there is this state of ignorance where people are reactive, basically, and they're using potentially specific singular parts of the brain. I don't know, one devoted to tool making and then another one to social interaction, etc. But these areas, these sort of like chambers or chapels within the brain, they don't communicate with each other. There is, of course, no awareness of ego. There is no awareness of the self. There is no awareness of thinking. And in the moment that, of course, we encounter somehow the tree of knowledge, there is this difference between good and evil. There is this awareness of a separation. There's awareness of a duality in the world. In the very beginning, God separates day from night or waters and sky, but it is in the creation of man that there still seems to be like a sense of oneness. Then, of course, we are told about the snake and the temptation in a lot of different stories, very similar. And of course, I'm thinking about the parallels between the Spirit of God and his breath descending, as the Kundalini descending and coiling at the base of the spine, or, God breathing into a piece of clay. And this shift likely introduced, of course, migraines, hallucinations, visions, dreams, and this awareness of thinking, of an invisible side within ourselves, which probably created confusion and chaos and fear as early humans grapple with this new awareness. What did it feel to being aware of the very first thought, when this unconscious rises into awareness? In the beginning was the word. We read, for example, in the Bible, from the Greek logos. Logos is not a word. Actually, logos is reasoning. So the act of discerning, of making sense of chaos. And this logos to me emerges as a response to this chaos, and provides a tool for human to make sense of their evolution, of their development and change. And drawing at that moment becomes a materialization of Sophia, or wisdom. So wisdom takes a physical form, an external physical form. And so where somehow intuition, insight, or wisdom, plus the concept of reasoning, they are personified, and it's like a tool to make sense. And is, of course, an alchemical process that helps integrating conscious awareness as a way of externalizing, understand what is happening internally. It's a fixing of a thinking processes on a rock. It's a visualization of an inner process. While one is the pure potentiality as wisdom, the other one is the doing, which is the logos, which is actually the reasoning. And to me, Sophia and Logos is like a dance between Shiva and Shakti in other, for example, in Hinduism, where Shiva is the transformative power and Shakti is the creative energy. And together, there are sort of interplay of opposites. And I'm always reminded of electrotechnics, where power, i.e. voltage, is measured as a difference in potentials. So you always have a duality and a difference in order to create energy and create movement. Edward Edinger, who was a Jungian analyst and a psychiatrist, wrote about meaning, the meaning and the etymology of consciousness as in knowing with, as being different from science, which is just knowing. And consciousness implies a relationship, a duality, a setting of two-ness. So this is the first ever split. It's an inner relationship between the ego and part of the rest of the psyche when the unconscious appears. And in a way, we do have power, and we are truly alive when there is an interplay or an exchange between our conscious awareness and the unconscious well of our inner world. And this inner questioning is now fixed into sort of like a universal symbolic form on a rock for all to see, even though we should again question who these all are, since the caves are just such a dark places. At this moment in my research, what I've done is I have sort of created and noticed 6 stages of separation. The first one is the awareness of the personal invisible. I realized that there is an invisible part in me, which is different from the visible of the physical body. And this is where the psychological awareness of the I begins, is recognizing oneself as separate from the others. The second stage is the separation of the I and the thou, so me and you. I am separate from the world, and I'm separate from you, I'm different from you. And this is like a full recognition of individuality and a difference. And being different means that I can be a rebel. I can decide to say no. If the whole tribe decides to move, I can decide instead to stay because I really like this cave and my drawings. In duality, we see this even in the concept from the Driksha Viveka, which is a 1350 book by Adi Shankaracharya, I think, where there is this difference between the seer and the seen. So there is a knowing subject and the known object, and we can be both. And Jung said, existence is only real when it is conscious to somebody. So if I'm aware of somebody, this person actually really exists. The third point, I'm going to be very quickly now, is the question of the invisible in the other. So whether an animal or a human also contains an invisible part. So recognizing that there is potentially another interior world and reality that I cannot see. And if I cannot see theirs, they cannot see mine, or can they? And I'm wondering if the very first burials are because of the handling also of the invisible. So maybe if I hide the body, maybe I also hide they're invisible. Stage number 4 is leaving a mark, and the moment that I actually leave a mark, I define a space, and because this is my mark, this space becomes also a place. Number 5 is defining space, because defining space because which gives us time, and this is because, of course, we cannot have time unless we have space, because time is a measure of change in a space that has got boundaries and it is very well defined. And number 6 is transcendence. So the emergence of transcendence and alchemy and transformation. And this is the moment in which alchemy becomes the conversation and the awareness. Alchemy becomes the questioning of the unknown and the unseen, while shamanic practices at that point become the relationship with this unseen and this unknown. And to me, the fact of noticing the awareness of the invisible part in somebody else is this idea of the nakedness of not knowing how much we can see or we can be seen by other people. And also this act of reasoning, of thinking, of planning for seeing and hearing the invisible. We are like somehow gods, and now we are out of the Garden of Eden and out of this blissful ignorance. From then on, we return to a state of wholeness. We try to go back home. We try to go back to the Father, to find the oneness and to find wholeness. And this kind of like individuation, even in somehow Jungian terms, there is a continuous human journey to reconcile the conscious and the unconscious, and to return to a sense of unity and integration. One important thing to remember is that from the perspective of human beings, we are separated from God. But if we read St. Thomas' Apocrypha Gospel, from the perception of God and the point of view of God, actually we are never separated. The question that I have is this a cycle that constantly continues repeating since the very beginning? Maybe this awareness or emergence of awareness applies to the human psyche today, and we are just repeating the same species or collective evolution on a personal basis in our life. And I like Jung because Jung gives us insights into archetypes and collective unconscious, which helps us understand this sort of like timeless striving for wholeness. There's a repetition of imageries, stories, metaphors, regardless of when or where. Also, the awareness that the outside world has changed so fast, but our inner world sometimes is still there, asking the same questions that we would have asked 78,000 years ago. And the importance of the embodied experience of actually leaving maybe the digital world on the side, and sort of really importance now, especially from a therapeutic perspective and relationship, learning to be a bit more aware of the wholeness of our being, and also the difference between the sort of like working from a subconscious and unconscious time from a timeline perspective. Therapeutically, normally we work and we bring our life and or our life and our parents' life, because of course a family trauma, or our life and our children's life. But what if actually we are able to see our life from the perspective of 78,000 years ago? And what is the significance of my journey, my presence, my story, my evolution within this larger, longer, wider, and deeper spectra of experiences? My forte is making connections and seeing overlappings between phenomenology, the landscape, shamanism, alchemy, Jungian analysis, drawing practice, and you name it. But before I end, I want to say thank you and to show my deep respect to those ones who have chosen their specific disciplines. They've researched and studied and invested, of course, time and effort, because without their work, I wouldn't be here sitting in my metaphorical and not only white table. So here I'm leaving you. Here you got my details. I believe that somebody from Creswell Crags also will have the possibility maybe of disseminating the PDF of the slides if anyone is interested. Also my BA and MRes, as I said, dissertations are on my website. My books are available on Amazon. There is also some bibliography if anybody is interested, but feel free to email me and ask me if you need anything. And I have been Matilde, and this was Echoes of Creation. Ciao!